The autumn wind carried the scent of approaching rain as the evening settled over the city of San Antonio. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a palette of deep purples and fading oranges that painted the sky above St. Michael's Hospital. It was a beautiful evening, the kind that made people pause and appreciate the simple wonder of being alive. But inside the hospital, no one was looking at the sky. The fluorescent lights of St. Michael's Hospital hummed with their familiar monotonous drone as the evening shift began. The emergency room was already filling up with the usual mix of minor injuries, worried parents, and the occasional serious case that would keep the staff running until dawn. Outside, a late autumn rain pelted the windows, turning the parking lot into a shimmering reflection of headlights and street lamps. The hospital itself was a sprawling complex that had been built in the 1960s and expanded multiple times since then. Its corridors were a maze of identical hallways, fluorescent lighting, and the constant beeping of medical equipment. The walls were painted in that particular shade of institutional beige that seemed designed to be as forgettable as possible. Motivational posters hung at regular intervals, their cheerful messages about teamwork and perseverance feeling increasingly ironic as the night wore on. Rebecca Morrison checked her watch and sighed. She had been on her feet for 16 hours already, covering for a colleague who had called in sick, and her patience was wearing thin. At 34 years old, she had been a nurse for 12 years, and lately every shift felt longer than the last. The job had worn her down in ways she had not expected when she first started, bright-eyed and full of idealism about saving lives and making a difference. She remembered her first day at St. Michael's, fresh out of nursing school, with a brand-new pair of scrubs and a heart full of hope. She had truly believed, that she could make a difference in people's lives. That every patient who came through those doors was an opportunity to help, to heal, to connect. She had stayed late, come in early, volunteered for extra shifts. She had held hands and wiped tears and celebrated victories no matter how small. But somewhere along the way, the idealism had faded. The endless parade of suffering had begun to blur together. The budget cuts had meant fewer staff and more patients. The paperwork had multiplied until it seemed like she spent more time filling out forms than actually caring for people. The small victories had been overshadowed by the inevitable losses, the patients who slipped away despite everything they did, the families who blamed the staff for outcomes no one could control. Now she just wanted to get through the night without any drama. Rebecca had not always been this way. There was a time when she had approached each patient with genuine curiosity, when she had taken the time to learn their names and their stories, when she had believed that nursing was a calling rather than just a job. But somewhere along the way, that idealism had eroded, worn down by budget cuts and staff shortages and the relentless parade of human suffering that marched through these doors day after day. Her own life had not helped matters. A divorce 3 years ago had left her living alone in a small apartment, sharing custody of a cat with her ex-husband, wondering how she had ended up so far from the life she had imagined for herself. Her parents had moved to Florida for retirement. Her sister lived in New York, and her closest friends had drifted away as marriages and children and careers pulled them in different directions. The marriage had ended not with a dramatic explosion, but with a slow, sad fizzle. Michael had been a good man, a software engineer who worked from home and made dinner every night and never forgot their anniversary. But he had wanted children, and Rebecca had kept putting it off, always saying next year, always finding reasons to wait. Until one day she realized she did not want children at all, had never really wanted them, had only been going along with the expectation because it seemed like what she was supposed to do. The divorce had been amicable, as divorces go. They had split their possessions fairly, sold the house they had bought together, and gone their separate ways with promises to stay friends. But the promises had faded like everything else, and now Michael was remarried with a baby on the way, and Rebecca was alone in her small apartment. watching reality television and wondering where her life had gone wrong. The hospital had become her whole world, and it was slowly consuming her from the inside out. She poured herself a cup of bitter coffee from the break room pot, grimacing at the taste, but needing the caffeine to get through the next 8 hours. Through the window she could see the waiting room filling up, and she steeled herself for whatever the night would bring. The break room was empty except for a younger nurse named Jessica, who was scrolling through her phone with the glazed expression of someone who had long since stopped seeing what was on the screen. Rebecca nodded to her, but did not stop to chat. She did not have the energy for small talk tonight. The waiting room was crowded, filled with coughing children, elderly patients clutching paperwork, and anxious family members checking their phones. Rebecca scanned the room from behind the admissions desk, mentally triaging the cases she could see. A young mother with a feverish toddler, an older man holding his arm at an awkward angle, a teenager with what looked like a sprained ankle. And then her eyes landed on them. An old man sat in the corner, his weathered face lined with decades of sun exposure and hard living. He wore a faded flannel shirt and jeans that had seen better days, and his work boots were caked with mud that had dried and cracked on the waiting room floor. His hair was white and thin, combed back from a forehead that bore the deep creases of a life spent squinting into the sun. His hands rested on his knees, large and calloused, the hands of a man who had spent his life working with them. There was something about those hands that Rebecca noticed but did not register, not at first. They were scarred, the skin twisted and discolored in patterns that suggested old burns. But in her exhausted state, she dismissed this observation, filing it away with all the other details that she no longer had the energy to process. Beside him sat a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with tangled brown hair and a dirty face. She was clutching a worn, stuffed rabbit and staring at the floor with wide, frightened eyes. Her clothes were too big for her, the sleeves of her jacket hanging past her fingertips, the hem of her dress trailing on the floor. There were stains on the fabric that might have been food or dirt or something else entirely, and her shoes were held together with what looked like duct tape. The girl's eyes were what struck Rebecca the most, though she would not admit it until later. They were brown, almost black, and they held a wariness that seemed far too old for such a young face. They were the eyes of someone who had learned not to trust, who had been hurt too many times to believe that adults could be safe. Rebecca felt a flash of irritation. The man looked like he had just walked in from a construction site, tracking dirt everywhere, and the child looked like she had not had a bath in days. In her exhausted state, she made assumptions she would later regret. She had seen this before, or thought she had. Homeless people using children to get faster service, scam artists preying on the sympathy of hospital staff, people who took advantage of the system instead of using it properly. In her years at St. Michael's, she had developed a kind of radar for these situations, a set of warning signs that she watched for automatically: the dirty clothes, the evasive manner, the unlikely relationship between the adult and the child. It all added up in her tired mind to something suspicious, something that required her to be on guard. She did not stop to consider that she might be wrong. She did not pause to ask herself what other explanations there might be. She simply saw what she expected to see and reacted accordingly. She walked over to them, her clipboard in hand, her expression professionally neutral, but with an edge of impatience that she did not bother to hide. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her voice clipped. The old man looked up at her with pale blue eyes that held a depth of weariness she should have recognized, but did not. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble that spoke of years of diesel engines and open highways. "This little one here needs to see a doctor. She's been having stomach pains all day, and she's running a fever." Rebecca glanced at the girl, who shrank back against the man's side, her small fingers tightening on the stuffed rabbit. "Are you her grandfather?" Rebecca asked. "No, ma'am," the man said. I'm looking after her." It's a complicated situation. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. She had seen this before, or thought she had. Homeless men using children to get sympathy, to get faster service, to get attention. The dirt, the disheveled appearance, the vague explanation. It all added up in her tired mind to something that made her defenses rise. "I'm going to need some identification," she said coldly, "and proof of your relationship to this child. We have protocols for situations like this." The words came out sharper than she had intended, but she did not soften them. In her experience, being firm from the start was better than being taken advantage of later. She had learned that lesson the hard way, through years of being manipulated by patients who saw kindness as weakness. But even as she spoke, something in the back of her mind whispered that she was making assumptions, that she was judging this man based on his appearance rather than any real evidence of wrongdoing. She pushed the thought aside. She did not have time for second-guessing. She had a waiting room full of patients and a long night ahead of her. The old man blinked, surprise flickering across his face. Situations like what exactly? Rebecca lowered her voice, but not enough. Situations where an unrelated adult brings in a child who appears to be neglected. We have a responsibility to ensure the safety of minors who come through our doors. The little girl's eyes went wide with fear, and she pressed herself closer to the old man. "Please don't take me away from Mr. Earl," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He's the only one who's been nice to me." The old man, Earl, put a protective arm around the child. "Now hold on just a minute," he said, his voice hardening. "This little girl is in pain. She needs medical attention. I brought her here because she's sick, not because I'm trying to pull something." Rebecca stood her ground. "Sir, I need to see some documentation. Otherwise I'll have to call social services and the police. It's hospital policy." Several people in the waiting room had turned to watch the confrontation, their conversations dying down as the tension escalated. A mother pulled her child closer. An older woman shook her head in disapproval, though it was unclear who she was disapproving of. Earl reached into his back pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. He opened it with hands that trembled slightly, whether from age or anger, Rebecca could not tell. He handed her a driver's license. "Earl Raymond Hutchins," she read aloud, her tone dismissive. "Amarillo, Texas." "You're a long way from home, Mr. Hutchins." "I'm a truck driver," Earl said. "Was a truck driver, I should say. Retired now. But old habits die hard, and I still take the occasional haul to keep myself busy." Rebecca handed back the license. "That still doesn't explain the child. Where are her parents?" The little girl began to cry, soft, quiet sobs that she tried to muffle against Earl's flannel shirt. Earl's face darkened with a mixture of pain and frustration. "Her parents," he said slowly, "are the reason she's with me. I found her at a rest stop 3 days ago, hiding behind the dumpsters, hungry, scared, covered in bruises. I've been trying to find the right authorities to help her, but every place I go, people like you treat us like criminals." Rebecca felt a flicker of doubt, but her exhaustion and her assumptions held firm. "That's a very convenient story, Mr. Hutchins, but you have to understand, we see all kinds of people come through here with all kinds of stories. Until I can verify what you're telling me, I can't just take your word for it." "So while you're verifying," Earl said, his voice rising, "this child is supposed to just sit here in pain. She's burning up with fever. She hasn't kept food down in 2 days. She needs help now, not after you've finished your paperwork." "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice," Rebecca said, her own voice sharp. "You're disturbing the other patients." The waiting room had gone completely silent now. Everyone was watching, some with sympathy for the old man and the child, others with suspicion. A security guard near the entrance had straightened up, his hand moving toward his radio. Earl took a deep breath, visibly struggling to control his temper. "Look," he said, his voice quieter, but no less intense. "I understand you have rules. I understand you have to be careful. But this little girl has been through more in her short life than you can imagine. The last thing she needs is to be treated like a suspect in some crime she didn't commit." Rebecca opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a door at the back of the waiting room swung open, and a doctor in blue scrubs stepped out. He was in his 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He stopped short when he saw the scene unfolding. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice calm, but carrying the authority of someone used to being in charge. Rebecca straightened. "Dr. Williams, this man brought in this child, but he's not a relative, and he can't provide proper documentation of their relationship. I was following protocol, and—" Dr. Williams held up a hand to stop her. He was staring at Earl with an expression that Rebecca could not quite read. Something like recognition, maybe, or disbelief. "Earl?" Dr. Williams said slowly. "Earl Hutchins?" Earl's eyes widened. "Tommy? Tommy Williams?" The doctor crossed the waiting room in 3 quick strides and pulled the old truck driver into a fierce embrace. "My God, Earl! It's been, what, 40 years?" "43, Earl said, his voice thick with emotion. "Last time I saw you, you were just a skinny kid with big dreams." Rebecca watched in confusion as the 2 men separated, both of them blinking back tears. "Doctor—" Williams kept his hand on Earl's shoulder, as if afraid he might disappear. "I don't understand," Rebecca said. "You 2 know each other?" Dr. Williams turned to her, and for the first time since she had started working at this hospital, she saw something in his eyes that made her feel very small. "Know each other?" he repeated. "Rebecca, this man saved my life. He saved the lives of 37 children, including mine." The waiting room erupted in murmurs. Rebecca felt the blood drain from her face. The clipboard in her hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy, like it was anchoring her to this moment of reckoning. "What are you talking about?" she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Williams's expression softened, but only slightly. "It was December 14th, 1981, he said, his voice taking on the measured quality of someone reciting a story they had told many times before, a story they would never forget. A school bus carrying 37 elementary school children was making its way through the Texas Panhandle when a blizzard hit. Visibility dropped to nearly 0. The bus driver lost control on an icy stretch of highway, and the bus went off the road, rolling into a ravine. Rebecca listened in horror as the picture became clearer with each word. "The impact ruptured the fuel tank," Dr. Williams continued. "Fire broke out almost immediately. The children were trapped inside, the doors jammed from the crash. The driver was unconscious, probably dead. We were all going to die in that bus." He paused, looking at Earl, with an expression of profound gratitude that transcended words. And then this man appeared. He was driving his truck on the same highway, and he saw the bus go over. He didn't call for help and wait. He didn't decide it wasn't his problem. He pulled over, climbed down into that ravine, and started pulling children out of the wreckage with his bare hands. Earl sat with his head bowed, his scarred hands folded in his lap. Rebecca could see them now, truly see them. The twisted skin, the permanent damage that spoke of unimaginable pain. "The fire was spreading," Dr. Williams said. "Earl had to go through the flames to reach the children in the back. His jacket caught fire. His hands were burning. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. He kept going back, again and again, until every single child was out. 37 children. And then the bus exploded. The waiting room was absolutely silent now. Every eye was on Earl, who sat with his head bowed, his scarred hands folded in his lap. "I was one of those children," Dr. Williams continued. "I was 8 years old. I remember him lifting me out of the smoke, carrying me through the cold, telling me everything was going to be okay. He's the reason I became a doctor. He's the reason I'm alive." "Doctor." Williams guided Earl to a chair, his hand lingering on the old man's shoulder in a gesture that spoke of decades of gratitude. Then he gently lifted the little girl into his arms. "She's burning up," he said to a nearby nurse. "Get her into exam room 3 immediately. Full workup, IV fluids, and let's get those stomach pains diagnosed." He looked at Earl. "I'll take care of her personally. You have my word." Earl nodded, his eyes never leaving the child as she was carried away. "Thank you, Tommy. I knew if I could just get her to the right person." Another nurse came forward, a woman in her 60s with grey hair and kind eyes. She had been standing near the back of the waiting room, watching the scene unfold. "I remember that accident," she said softly. "It was all over the news for weeks. They called you the Angel of the Panhandle." Earl looked up, embarrassed. "I wasn't an angel. I was just a man who happened to be in the right place at the right time." "You were more than that," the older nurse said firmly. "You were a hero. You are a hero." The waiting room seemed to exhale collectively. People who had been watching with suspicion now looked at Earl with something like reverence. The mother who had pulled her child closer moved toward him instead, reaching out to touch his arm in gratitude. The security guard who had been ready to escort him out stood at attention, a salute forming unconsciously on his lips. Rebecca's clipboard slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. She stared at Earl, seeing him now with different eyes. The weathered face, the work-worn hands, the quiet dignity that she had mistaken for something else entirely. I didn't know," she stammered. "Sir, I'm so sorry. I didn't—" Earl looked up at her, and to her surprise, there was no anger in his eyes, just a profound weariness and something that might have been understanding. "You were doing your job," he said quietly. "You were trying to protect that little girl. I can't fault you for that. But maybe next time, try leading with a little more kindness. You never know who you're talking to or what they've been through." Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face. She could not remember the last time she had cried at work, the last time anything had broken through the armor she had built around herself. "The little girl," she managed. "What's her story? Where did she come from?" Earl sighed, a sound that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. "Her name is Lily. I found her 3 days ago at a truck stop in New Mexico. She was hiding, like I said, terrified, starving. She told me her mama's boyfriend had been hurting her, and her mama wouldn't do anything about it, so she ran. She'd been on her own for almost a week when I found her." The details emerged slowly, painfully, each word adding to the weight of the story. Earl described pulling into the rest stop around midnight, tired from a long haul, just wanting to stretch his legs and get a cup of coffee before hitting the road again. He had gone around the back of the building to the restrooms and heard a sound, a soft whimpering that at first he thought might be an injured animal, but it wasn't an animal. It was Lily, curled up behind a dumpster with nothing but a thin sweater to protect her from the cold desert night. She had been so frightened when he found her, so convinced that any adult was a threat, that it took him nearly an hour just to coax her out of hiding. "She hadn't eaten in 3 days, Earl said, his voice rough with emotion. "Can you imagine that? A little girl, 7 years old, alone in the dark, starving. I offered her a granola bar from my truck and she looked at me like I was offering her gold." He paused, lost in the memory. Rebecca waited, sensing that there was more he needed to say. "It took me 3 hours just to get her to come out from behind that dumpster," Earl continued. "Every time I reached toward her, she flinched like she expected to be hit. Every time I spoke, she watched my hands instead of my face, like she was calculating how quickly she could dodge if I swung at her. 7 years old, and she had already learned to be afraid of every adult she met." His voice cracked slightly. "When I finally got her into my truck, she sat as far away from me as she could, pressed against the door, watching me like I was a wild animal that might attack at any moment. It broke my heart. No child should ever have to feel that way." "What did you do?" Rebecca asked softly, her hostility completely gone now. "I just talked to her," Earl said. "I told her about my daughter, about my grandkids, about the places I'd been on the road. I didn't ask her any questions, didn't push her for information. I just let her know that she was safe, that I wasn't going to hurt her, that she could trust me." And slowly, bit by bit, she started to open up. He looked at the door where Lily had been taken, his eyes filled with concern. "She told me about her mama's boyfriend first. How he would come into her room at night, how he would grab her arm so hard it left bruises, how he would scream at her for things that weren't her fault, and how her mama just let it happen, looked the other way, pretended everything was fine. Dear God, Rebecca whispered, her hand covering her mouth. I couldn't just leave her there, Earl continued. I know I should have called the police right away, but she begged me not to. She was so scared of being put back in that situation, of being returned to those people. So I did what I thought was right. I fed her, cleaned her up as best I could, and started driving toward my daughter's place in California. My daughter, she works with Child Protective Services. I figured if anyone would know what to do, it would be her. And you stopped here because Lily got sick, Dr. Williams said. Earl nodded. She started getting worse yesterday. The fever, the stomach pains. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to get her help, even if it meant dealing with people who looked at me like I was some kind of monster. He said this last part without bitterness, just a statement of fact. Rebecca felt the words like a physical blow. Dr. Williams put his hand on Earl's shoulder again. You did the right thing, Earl. You've always done the right thing. That's just who you are. I try, Earl said simply. I just try to do what's right. Over the next few hours, the hospital transformed around Earl Hutchins. Word of who he was spread quickly through the staff, and one by one, doctors and nurses found reasons to pass by the waiting room, to catch a glimpse of the man who had saved 37 children nearly half a century ago. Rebecca stayed close, unwilling to leave, unable to shake the shame that had settled over her like a shroud. She watched as Earl was brought coffee, as a nurse offered him a blanket, as the security guard who had been ready to escort him out came over to shake his hand. But Earl's attention remained fixed on the door to the examination rooms, waiting for news about Lily. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dr. Williams emerged. His face was serious but not grim, and Earl rose to his feet with an agility that belied his 78 years. How is she? He asked. She's going to be okay, Dr. Williams said, and Earl's shoulders sagged with relief. It's a severe stomach infection, probably from eating contaminated food while she was on her own. We've got her on antibiotics and IV fluids. She's responding well. Can I see her? Of course. She's been asking for you. Dr. Williams smiled. She calls you Grandpa Earl. Earl's eyes glistened. She started calling me that yesterday. I didn't correct her. Why would you? She needs someone to be her grandpa right now, and I can't think of anyone better for the job. They walked together toward the examination rooms, but Earl paused and turned back to Rebecca, who was still standing where he had left her, her face streaked with dried tears. Nurse Morrison, he said. Rebecca looked up, bracing herself for whatever rebuke was coming. But Earl just smiled, a warm, gentle smile that seemed to erase the harsh words that had passed between them. Thank you for caring enough to ask questions. A lot of kids slip through the cracks because nobody bothers to look twice. You looked twice. You just got it wrong this time, that's all. Rebecca shook her head. I was awful to you. I judged you without knowing anything about you. Earl walked back to her, his gait slow but steady. When he reached her, he took her hands in his. His palms were rough, scarred from the burns that had never fully healed, but his touch was gentle. We all do that sometimes, he said. We see someone who doesn't look like what we expect, and we make assumptions. It's human nature. The important thing is what we do next. Do we double down on our mistakes, or do we learn from them? Rebecca met his eyes, seeing in them a lifetime of wisdom earned through hardship and sacrifice. I want to learn, she said quietly. I want to be better than you will be. Earl squeezed her hands once, then released them. Now, I've got a little girl to check on, but maybe later you can come by her room. I think she'd like to meet the nurse who cared enough to ask questions. He walked away, leaving Rebecca standing in the middle of the waiting room, surrounded by patients and colleagues who had witnessed the entire exchange. She expected judgment, condemnation, whispered criticism. Instead, she felt hands on her shoulders, heard quiet words of support. We've all been there, an older nurse said softly. Long shifts, tired minds, quick judgments. The difference is whether we grow from it. Rebecca nodded, unable to speak. She had been a nurse for 12 years, and tonight, for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was learning something new about what that really meant. The night wore on, but it felt different now. Rebecca moved through her duties with a new awareness, looking at each patient not as a case to be processed, but as a person with a story she did not know. The homeless man with the infected foot. Maybe he had once been a teacher, a father, someone's hero. The teenage girl with the suspicious bruises. Maybe she was running from something too terrible to speak of. Every person who walked through those doors carried a history, a burden, a hope, and it was not Rebecca's job to judge them. It was her job to help them. Around 2 in the morning, during a rare lull in the chaos, Rebecca made her way to Lily's room. She paused outside the door, suddenly nervous, but then pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of monitors and a small nightlight that someone had thoughtfully provided. Lily lay in the hospital bed, looking impossibly small against the white sheets. An IV line ran into her arm, and her color was already better than it had been hours ago. The fever had broken. The room smelled of antiseptic and the faint sweetness of children's fever medicine. Medical equipment beeped softly in the background, a reassuring rhythm that spoke of healing and care. On the bedside table, someone had placed a small vase of flowers, daisies, cheerful and bright against the clinical whiteness of the room. And in the chair beside her bed, Earl sat with his eyes closed, one weathered hand resting on the blanket near Lily's arm. Even in sleep he was protecting her. His body was positioned between the door and the bed, a subconscious shield against any threat that might enter. His scarred hands, those hands that had pulled 37 children from a burning bus, now rested gently near a little girl he had known for less than a week, but would protect with his life. Rebecca approached quietly, not wanting to disturb them. She paused at the foot of the bed, taking in the scene before her. It was beautiful in its simplicity. An old man and a child, both wounded by life in different ways, finding comfort in each other's presence. But Lily's eyes fluttered open, and she looked up at Rebecca with a gaze that was far too old for her years. Those eyes had seen things no child should see, had learned lessons no child should have to learn, and yet there was still hope in them, still the capacity for trust that seemed miraculous under the circumstances. "Are you the mean nurse?" Lily asked, her voice small but not accusatory. Rebecca flinched. I was mean," she admitted. "I'm sorry, Lily. I was wrong about your Grandpa Earl. He's a good man." "I know," Lily said simply. "He saved me. He found me when I was so scared and hungry, and he took care of me. He didn't have to. He could have just driven away, but he didn't." Rebecca sat down in the chair on the opposite side of the bed. "Why do you think he stopped?" Lily considered this, her small brow furrowing in thought. "Because that's what good people do," she said finally. "They see someone who needs help, and they help them. Even when it's hard, even when other people might not understand." "You're a very smart girl," Rebecca said. "That's what my mama used to say," Lily replied, and a shadow passed over her face. "Before she stopped being my mama." Rebecca felt her heart break a little more. "Can you tell me what happened, Lily? With your mama?" Lily was quiet for a long moment, her fingers twisting in the blanket. Earl shifted in his chair but did not wake. "Mama got a new boyfriend," Lily said finally. "His name was Derek. At first he was nice. He bought me ice cream and let me watch TV late. But then he started being mean. He would yell at Mama, and sometimes he would hit her, and then he started being mean to me too." The words came out in a rush, like water breaking through a dam. Lily's small hands twisted in the blanket as she spoke, her voice trembling but determined. "He would get really angry," she continued, "about little things. Like if I left a toy on the floor or forgot to turn off the light in my room. He said I was wasteful and stupid. He said I was the reason Mama was sad all the time." "That's not true," Rebecca said firmly. "None of that was your fault." "I know that now," Lily said. "Grandpa Earl told me. He said Derek was the one who was broken, not me. He said some people have so much hurt inside them that they try to give it to other people. But that doesn't make it right. Grandpa Earl sounds like a very wise man." "He is," Lily agreed. "He tells me lots of things. Like how the stars are really far away, and how trucks work, and why the sky is blue. He's the smartest person I know." Rebecca's hands clenched in her lap. She had heard stories like this before, too many times, but each one still felt like a fresh wound. The casual cruelty of adults who should protect children, but instead became their tormentors. The complicity of mothers who chose partners over their own flesh and blood. The resilience of children who somehow found the strength to survive. "Did your mama know?" Rebecca asked gently. "About Derek hurting you?" Lily nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I told her Derek hurt me, but she said I was lying. She said I was trying to make trouble. She said if I didn't stop making up stories, she would send me away." "Oh, sweetheart," Rebecca breathed. "That wasn't your fault. None of it was your fault." "I know," Lily said, and there was a strength in her voice that surprised Rebecca. "Grandpa Earl told me that. He told me that some grown-ups make bad choices, and it's not because of anything kids do. It's just because they're broken inside and they don't know how to fix themselves. Grandpa Earl is a wise man. He's the best," Lily said, looking over at the sleeping figure in the chair. "When I grow up, I want to be like him. I want to help people who are scared and hurt. I want to make things better." Rebecca felt tears pricking her eyes again. "I think you already are, Lily. Just by being brave enough to run, brave enough to trust Earl, brave enough to tell your story, you're already making things better." Lily reached out her small hand, and Rebecca took it gently. The girl's fingers were warm now, the fever fading, life returning. "You're not really mean," Lily said. "You were just scared too. Scared of making a mistake, scared of not protecting kids like me." Rebecca stared at this child, this 7-year-old, who had seen more darkness than most adults ever would, and yet still had the capacity for such profound empathy. "How do you know that?" Rebecca asked. "Because I saw your face when Dr. Williams told you about Grandpa Earl," Lily said. "You looked like you wanted to disappear. You looked like you were so sorry. Mean people don't look like that. Mean people don't care if they're wrong." Earl stirred then, his eyes opening slowly. He blinked at the scene before him, Rebecca holding Lily's hand, both of them with tear-streaked faces, and a soft smile crossed his weathered features. "Making friends, I see," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Rebecca is going to be my nurse," Lily announced. "She's going to help take care of me. Is that so?" Earl looked at Rebecca, one eyebrow raised. "If that's okay with you," Rebecca said, "I'd like to help. However I can." Earl studied her for a long moment, seeing something in her that perhaps she did not even see in herself. "I think that would be just fine," he said. "Lily needs all the friends she can get." They sat together in the quiet room, the three of them connected by circumstances none of them could have predicted. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the first pale light of dawn was beginning to color the sky. "What happens now?" Rebecca asked. "With Lily, I mean. What's the plan?" Earl sighed. "I called my daughter last night, after Lily was settled. She's driving up from Los Angeles. Should be here by noon. She's already been in touch with Child Protective Services, setting things up. There'll be an investigation, a custody hearing, all of that. But in the meantime, she stays with you," Rebecca finished. "If they'll let me," Earl said. "I'm just an old truck driver. I don't have much to offer, except a warm bed and 3 squares a day." "You have more to offer than you know," Rebecca said quietly. "You have love. You have patience. You have the ability to make a scared little girl feel safe. That's worth more than all the money in the world." Earl's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. "I just try to do what's right," he said again. "It's all any of us can do." The morning shift arrived, and with it came a new energy in the hospital. News of Earl and Lily had spread beyond the staff, picked up by a local reporter who had been in the waiting room the night before. researching a completely different story. By the time Earl's daughter arrived at noon, there were news vans in the parking lot and journalists clamoring for interviews. Earl wanted none of it. He'd never sought recognition for the bus rescue in 1981, and he did not want it now. All he cared about was making sure Lily was safe. "I didn't save those kids for glory," he told Margaret when she showed him the news coverage on her phone. "I did it because they needed saving. Same with Lily. Same with anyone who needs help. You don't help people so they'll thank you or put you on TV. You help them because it's the right thing to do. But Dad, the coverage could help Lily's case," Margaret pointed out. "It shows that you're credible, that you're a good person." Earl shook his head firmly. "Lily's case will be decided by facts, not by publicity. And that little girl has been through enough without having cameras shoved in her face. She needs peace and quiet and love, not reporters asking her to relive her trauma for ratings." Margaret smiled despite herself. There was her father, still the same principled man who had raised her, still putting others first, even when the spotlight beckoned. The reporters tried everything to get an interview. They camped outside the hospital entrance, accosted staff members in the parking lot, called the switchboard so frequently that the hospital had to assign someone just to handle the inquiries. One enterprising journalist even tried to sneak into the pediatric wing by posing as a flower delivery person, but hospital security caught him before he got anywhere near Lily's room. Through it all, Earl remained calm and focused, his attention never wavering from Lily. She had spent 25 years working in child protective services, first as a caseworker, then as a supervisor, and now as a regional director. She had seen the worst of what people could do to children, and yet she had never become hardened to it. Like her father, she believed in the power of compassion to change lives. She had brought paperwork, contacts, and a plan of action that made Rebecca's head spin. But more than that, she had brought a fierce determination to make things right for this little girl who had already been failed by so many adults. "We've already got an emergency placement approved," Margaret explained, as they gathered in a small conference room. The room was small and clinical, with a table barely big enough for the four of them: Margaret, Earl, Rebecca, and Dr. Williams, who had refused to leave Earl's side. "Given the circumstances, Lily's medical condition, her trauma, and my father's role in rescuing her, the state has agreed to temporary guardianship while they investigate the mother and her boyfriend." Rebecca noticed how Margaret's voice hardened when she mentioned the boyfriend. There was a personal edge to her professionalism, a controlled anger that spoke of years of fighting these battles and never quite getting used to the casualties. "They're going to investigate?" Earl asked. Margaret nodded grimly. "Based on what Lily has told us, there are grounds for serious charges. I've already been in touch with law enforcement in New Mexico and Texas. The boyfriend is already in the system for previous assault convictions, 2 domestic violence charges that were dropped when the victims refused to testify, a restraining order from an ex-girlfriend. This isn't his first time hurting someone. It's just the first time he's going to face real consequences. And the mother?" Margaret hesitated, glancing at her father. She knew how hard this was for him. Earl had always believed in second chances, in the possibility of redemption, but some betrayals were harder to forgive than others. "She may face charges of child endangerment and failure to protect," Margaret finished. Earl looked pained. "I don't want to destroy that woman's life," he said. "She's still Lily's mother." "She stopped being Lily's mother the moment she chose her boyfriend over her child," Margaret said, her voice hard. "I've seen this too many times, Dad. These situations don't get better on their own. If we don't act now, Lily will end up back in that house, and next time she might not be lucky enough to find someone like you." Earl was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "You're right. I know you're right. It's just hard is all, thinking about what that little girl has been through, what she might still have to go through with all the legal proceedings and testimony and—" "She won't be alone," Margaret said firmly. "I'll make sure of that, and neither will you." The door opened, and Rebecca stepped in. She had changed into fresh scrubs, her hair pulled back, her face composed. But there was something different about her, a softness that had not been there the night before. "Sorry to interrupt," she said. "I just wanted to let you know that Lily is awake and asking for her grandpa Earl." Earl rose immediately, his joints creaking but his movements quick. "I'll be right there." "Mr. Hutchins," Rebecca said, stopping him at the door, "I just want to say thank you for your grace last night, for not holding my mistakes against me. I've been a nurse for a long time, but you taught me something important about what that really means." Earl looked at her with those pale blue eyes that had seen so much. "We're all learning, Nurse Morrison. Every single day we're all learning. The only real failure is giving up." He patted her shoulder gently and walked out of the room, heading toward Lily's bedside. Margaret watched him go, then turned to Rebecca. "My father has always been like that," she said. "Always seeing the best in people, always giving second chances. He could have been bitter after the bus accident, the burns, the pain, the months of recovery. But instead, he just became more determined to help however he could." "The other children from the bus?" Rebecca asked. "What happened to them?" Margaret smiled. "They stayed in touch. A lot of them anyway. Every year on the anniversary of the accident, they send cards, make phone calls, show up at his door. Dr. Williams isn't the only one who became a doctor because of my father. There's a teacher, a firefighter, a social worker, even a senator. They all credit him with giving them a second chance at life." "That's incredible." "That's just Dad," Margaret said simply. "He doesn't see anything incredible about it. He just sees people who needed help and did what he could to provide it. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. The police came to take statements. Child Protective Services sent representatives to assess Lily and make arrangements, and the media continued to circle like sharks, scenting blood. Through it all, Earl remained calm and focused, his attention never wavering from Lily. He held her hand during the difficult interviews, whispered reassurances when she became frightened, and made her laugh with silly jokes when the tension became too much. Rebecca watched from a distance, her heart full of a strange mixture of admiration and regret. She'd almost turned this man away. She had almost let her exhaustion and her assumptions deny this little girl the care she needed. It was a lesson she would never forget. Late in the afternoon, as the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, Rebecca found a quiet moment to visit Lily's room one more time. Earl was there as always, but this time Lily was sitting up in bed looking worlds better than she had the night before. "Nurse Rebecca!" Lily exclaimed, her face lighting up. "Look, they're going to let me go home with Grandpa Earl tomorrow." "That's wonderful news," Rebecca said, genuinely smiling for what felt like the first time in months. "Are you feeling better?" "Much better. The doctor said the medicine is working. And look," Lily held up a small stuffed bear that someone had given her. "His name is Earl Jr." Earl chuckled. "She insisted," he said. "I tried to tell her Earl wasn't a name for a bear, but she wouldn't hear it." "It's a perfect name," Lily declared, "because he's brave and he helps people just like you." Rebecca sat down in her usual chair, the one that had somehow become hers over the past 24 hours. "Lily," she said, "I want you to know something. What happened last night when I was not very nice to your Grandpa Earl, I'm very sorry about that. I made a mistake, and I hope you can forgive me." Lily cocked her head, considering. "Did you learn something from your mistake?" Rebecca nodded. "I learned a lot. I learned not to judge people by how they look. I learned to listen first and assume later. And I learned that heroes don't always wear capes or uniforms. Sometimes they wear flannel shirts and drive trucks." Earl looked away, embarrassed but pleased. "Then I forgive you," Lily said with the simple decisiveness of childhood. "Grandpa Earl says that everyone makes mistakes, and what matters is that we try to do better next time. Your Grandpa Earl is a very wise man." "I know," Lily said, beaming. "That's why I'm going to keep him. The evening news that night carried the story of Earl Hutchins, the retired truck driver who had once saved 37 children from a burning bus and was now saving another child from a different kind of fire. The footage showed him leaving the hospital with Lily in his arms, the little girl's face buried against his shoulder, her small hands clutching his flannel shirt. Reporters shouted questions, but Earl just smiled and said, "No comment. This isn't about me. It's about a little girl who needed help, that's all," but the story had taken on a life of its own. Within days, it had gone viral, shared millions of times across social media. People who had never met Earl Hutchins felt connected to him, inspired by him, moved to action by his example. Dr. Williams gave interviews about the bus accident, about the man who had carried him through the snow so many years ago. Other survivors came forward with their own stories, their own expressions of gratitude for the life they had been given because of one man's courage. And in the quiet of his small apartment in California, Earl mostly ignored it all. He was too busy helping Lily adjust to her new life, too busy making sure she ate her vegetables and did her homework, and knew, beyond any shadow of doubt, that she was loved. 2 weeks after that night in the hospital, Rebecca received a letter in the mail. It was handwritten on simple notebook paper, the letters careful and deliberate in the way of a child still learning to write. The envelope was decorated with stickers of stars and butterflies, and her name was written in purple crayon. Rebecca sat down at her kitchen table, her coffee growing cold beside her as she carefully opened the envelope. Her hands were trembling slightly, though she was not sure why. It was just a letter from a child, she told herself, nothing to get emotional about. But as she unfolded the paper and began to read, she felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Dear Nurse Rebecca," it read, "thank you for being nice to me at the hospital. Grandpa Earl says you were scared and tired, and that's why you weren't nice at first. I understand because I get scared and tired too sometimes, and it makes me grumpy. Grandpa Earl says that when we feel grumpy, we should take a deep breath and remember that everyone is fighting their own battles. He says you were fighting your own battles that night, and that's why you made a mistake. I am doing much better now. The medicine the doctors gave me made my tummy stop hurting, and I eat 3 meals every day plus snacks. Margaret says I'm going to get so big I'll need all new clothes, which is funny because I've never had so many clothes in my life. I go to a new school, and I have a teacher named Mrs. Patterson who is very nice. She lets me read books at my desk when I finish my work early, and she says I'm the best reader in the class. I made a friend named Sophie, and we like to draw pictures together. Sophie has red hair and freckles, and she laughs at all my jokes, even when they're not very funny. Grandpa Earl's daughter Margaret is going to adopt me. That means she will be my new mommy. But I will still call Grandpa Earl my grandpa because that is what he is. We had a special dinner to celebrate, and Margaret made my favorite food, which is spaghetti with meatballs. Grandpa Earl wore a tie and looked very handsome. Thank you for taking care of me when I was sick. I hope you are not so tired anymore and that you remember to be nice to people even when they look different or dirty or old. Grandpa Earl says that everyone has a story, and we should try to learn their stories before we judge them. I think that is very good advice. Love, Lily P.S. Earl Jr. the bear says hi. He sleeps with me every night and keeps me safe from bad dreams. P.P.S. I drew you a picture. It's me and Grandpa Earl and Margaret and you. I made you a rainbow because you deserve happy colors. Rebecca turned the paper over and saw a child's drawing in bright crayon colors. There were 4 figures standing in front of a house, all of them smiling, with a massive rainbow arching over their heads. One of the figures had brown hair and wore blue scrubs, and Lily had written Nurse Rebecca above it in shaky letters. Rebecca read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she carefully folded it and placed it in her locker at work, where she could look at it whenever she needed a reminder of why she had become a nurse in the first place. The months that followed brought changes for everyone involved in that fateful night. Lily thrived in her new home, the trauma of her past slowly healing under the patient love of Earl and Margaret. She started therapy, made friends, discovered a talent for art that her teachers said was remarkable for her age. The investigation into her mother and Derek had resulted in criminal charges. Derek was arrested on multiple counts of child abuse and was awaiting trial. Lily's mother, confronted with the evidence of what had happened under her roof, had finally broken down and admitted her failure to protect her daughter. She was ordered into a treatment program and lost her parental rights. It was a harsh outcome, but it was also a new beginning. For Lily, for Earl, for everyone whose lives had intersected on that rainy night in the emergency room. Rebecca continued to work at St. Michael's Hospital, but she was not the same nurse she had been before. She took more time with patients, asked more questions, made fewer assumptions. She volunteered to mentor new nurses, sharing the lessons she had learned about compassion and humility. And once a month, she drove to Earl's apartment in the suburbs of Los Angeles, bringing cookies and coloring books for Lily and spending an afternoon listening to Earl's stories about the road, about the people he had met, about the simple philosophy that had guided his entire life. "Just try to do what's right," he would say, his pale blue eyes crinkling with warmth. "It's not always easy. It's not always clear. But if you lead with kindness, you'll usually end up in a good place." 1 year after their first meeting, Rebecca received an invitation in the mail. It was printed on thick, creamy paper, the kind used for special occasions. "You are cordially invited to the adoption finalization of Lily Hope Hutchins," it read. "Please join us as we celebrate her official entry into our family." The words blurred as tears filled Rebecca's eyes. She had followed Lily's progress over the past year, visited when she could, sent cards and small gifts on holidays. She had watched the frightened, dirty little girl transform into a confident, happy child who laughed easily and hugged freely. The healing had been remarkable, a testament to the power of love and safety and belonging. Rebecca cleared her schedule, bought a new dress, a soft blue that reminded her of the Texas sky, and drove to the courthouse on the appointed day. The building was a grand old structure with marble columns and high ceilings, the kind of place where important things happened. Today, one of the most important things she could imagine was about to take place. The room was packed with people, friends, family, former bus crash survivors who had come from across the country to witness this moment. Rebecca recognized faces from the news coverage, men and women in their 50s and 60s who had once been the children Earl pulled from a burning bus. They had become doctors and teachers and lawyers and parents, all of them carrying the gift of life that one man had given them. Dr. Williams was there, of course, sitting in the second row with his wife and their 2 grown children. He caught Rebecca's eye and nodded, a smile crossing his face. They had become friends over the past year, bonded by their shared connection to Earl and Lily, by their shared understanding of what had happened that night in the emergency room. The courtroom fell silent as the judge entered, a dignified woman in her 60s with silver hair and a no-nonsense expression that softened when she saw Lily approach the bench. Earl sat in the front row, looking distinguished in a suit that Rebecca suspected he had not worn in decades. The jacket hung a little loose on his thin frame, and his tie was slightly crooked, but there was a dignity about him that transcended fashion. This was a man who had spent his life in flannel shirts and work boots, who was more comfortable behind the wheel of a truck than in a courtroom, but who would do anything for the little girl standing before the judge. Beside him sat Lily, radiant in a white dress with flowers in her hair. She had chosen the outfit herself, Margaret had told Rebecca, spending 3 shopping trips and countless hours of deliberation before settling on this particular combination of lace and ribbon. It was perfect for her, sweet and innocent, but with a touch of strength, just like Lily herself. Margaret stood before the judge, her voice steady as she made the formal declarations of guardianship and love. And when the judge pronounced the adoption complete, when Lily officially became Lily Hope Hutchins, the courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. Earl swept the little girl into his arms, tears streaming down his weathered face, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Because to him, she was. After the ceremony, there was a reception at a nearby restaurant. The place had been reserved entirely for the celebration. Its usually austere private dining room transformed into a wonderland of balloons and streamers in Lily's favorite colors, purple and gold. A banner stretched across the main wall. "Welcome to the family, Lily Hope Hutchins." A table in the corner was piled high with presents, wrapped in bright paper and tied with ribbons. Another table held a massive cake decorated with flowers and butterflies, the words "Forever Family" written in purple frosting. Rebecca found herself sitting next to Dr. Williams, who had also made the trip from St. Michael's. They had developed an easy friendship over the past year, meeting occasionally for coffee in the hospital cafeteria, exchanging updates about Lily's progress. "You know," he said, sipping his champagne, a thoughtful expression on his face, "I've thought a lot about that night in the hospital, about how close we came to everything going wrong." Rebecca nodded, the memory still sharp despite the passage of time. "If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't recognized Earl, he would have figured it out," Dr. Williams said with certainty. "That's the thing about Earl. He always figures it out. He never gives up on people, never stops trying to do what's right. But it might have taken longer, and Lily might have suffered more. So I'm glad it happened the way it did." "Even the part where I was horrible to him?" Rebecca asked, still wincing at the memory. Dr. Williams smiled, a warm, understanding expression. "Even that part. Because you learned from it, you grew from it, and now you're a better nurse than you were before. Earl wouldn't have it any other way. He believes in redemption, in second chances. He'd be the first to tell you that mistakes only matter if you refuse to learn from them." Rebecca looked across the room to where Earl was showing Lily how to dance, the two of them swaying awkwardly to the music, laughing at their own clumsiness. Lily's dress twirled around her ankles as Earl spun her gently, his scarred hands holding hers with infinite care. Other guests had formed a circle around them, watching with misty eyes and fond smiles. Someone had started recording on their phone, capturing the moment for posterity. But Earl and Lily were oblivious to the attention, lost in their own world of music and movement and love. "He really is something special," she said softly. "He's just a man who tries to do what's right," Dr. Williams replied. "But sometimes that's the most special thing of all." The years continued to pass, marked by birthdays and holidays and the ordinary miracles of everyday life. Lily grew into a confident young woman, her early trauma a scar that had healed but never quite disappeared. She graduated high school with honors, gave a speech at the ceremony that moved everyone to tears, and enrolled in a nursing program at the same hospital where she had once been a patient. Earl, now in his 90s, had slowed down considerably. His truck driving days were long behind him, and his memory sometimes faltered in ways that frightened those who loved him. But his essential kindness remained intact, a North Star that guided everyone around him. On the day of Lily's graduation from nursing school, the family gathered once again at St. Michael's Hospital, where everything had begun so many years before. Rebecca, now the head of the nursing department, had arranged for the ceremony to be held in the hospital's main auditorium, a symbolic gesture that meant more than words could express. Earl sat in the front row, Margaret on one side and Dr. Williams on the other. He was thin and frail, but his blue eyes were clear as he watched his granddaughter walk across the stage to receive her diploma. Lily paused before taking the scroll from the dean. She looked out at the audience, found Earl's face, and spoke directly to him. "Everything I am," she said, her voice carrying through the silent auditorium, "I owe to one man, a man who saw a scared, dirty, hungry little girl hiding behind a dumpster and chose not to walk away. A man who taught me that kindness is stronger than hate, that love is stronger than fear, and that one person can make a difference just by trying to do what's right. She held up her diploma. This is for you, Grandpa Earl, for everything you gave me, for everyone you've saved, for the lesson you taught me that I will spend the rest of my life trying to pass on to others. The auditorium erupted in applause. Earl bowed his head, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. Margaret gripped his hand on one side, Dr. Williams on the other. And in the back of the room, Rebecca Morrison wiped her eyes and remembered a rainy night 16 years ago, when she'd looked at an old truck driver and a dirty little girl and seen only problems to be solved. How wrong she had been, how gloriously, wonderfully wrong. After the ceremony, there was a reception in the hospital's atrium. Lily moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and hugs, but her eyes kept returning to Earl, who sat quietly in a corner, watching her with undisguised pride. Finally, she made her way to him, knelt beside his wheelchair, and took his scarred hands in hers. "Thank you, Grandpa," she said, "for stopping, for caring, for being you." Earl smiled, his eyes crinkling with warmth. "I just tried to do what was right," he said. The words he had spoken so many times over so many years. "It's all any of us can do." Lily kissed his forehead. "And I will spend my life trying to do the same," she promised. "Every patient I see, every person I help, I will remember what you taught me, that everyone has a story, that everyone deserves compassion, that the most important thing we can do is see each other, really see each other, and respond with love." Earl nodded slowly. "That's all I ever wanted," he said softly. "For you to be happy, for you to be kind. You've given me more than I ever dreamed." They sat together in silence as the reception continued around them. Two people bound by fate and choice and love. The scared little girl who had once asked a stranger for help. The old truck driver who had never learned how to say no to someone in need. Their story had begun with fear and confusion and harsh words in a hospital waiting room. But it had become something beautiful, a testament to the power of second chances and the enduring strength of human connection. Earl Hutchins passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 months later, with Lily holding his hand and Margaret sitting beside them. He was 92 years old. The doctors said his heart simply gave out, worn down by a lifetime of hard work and harder choices, of giving pieces of himself to everyone who needed them. But those who knew him said his heart had never stopped being strong. It had just finished its work and decided to rest. The funeral was held on a crisp autumn morning, the kind of day Earl had always loved. Clear skies, gentle breeze, the world painted in shades of gold and amber. The church was not large enough to hold everyone who wanted to attend, so speakers were set up outside, broadcasting the service to the overflow crowd that spilled onto the lawn and sidewalk. They came from everywhere. Truck drivers who had known Earl on the road, some of them driving hundreds of miles to pay their respects. Former bus crash survivors, now grown with families of their own, many of them bringing their children and grandchildren to see the man who had made their existence possible. Nurses and doctors from St. Michael's Hospital, social workers who had worked with Margaret, neighbors and friends and strangers who had heard Earl's story and wanted to be part of his farewell. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, former bus crash survivors, fellow truckers, patients and nurses and doctors whose lives he had touched in ways large and small. But it was Lily who gave the eulogy, standing before the crowd with the same strength and grace that Earl had taught her. "My grandfather," she said, and the word felt right in a way it never had before, was not a famous man. He never sought recognition or reward. He never thought of himself as a hero. He was just a truck driver who tried to do what was right. She paused, gathering herself. The church was silent, hundreds of people holding their breath, waiting. "When I first met Grandpa Earl, I was a scared little girl, hiding behind a dumpster in the middle of the night. I was hungry, cold, and convinced that every adult in the world wanted to hurt me. I had given up hope. I had decided that I was going to die in that rest stop, alone and forgotten, and maybe that would be better than going back to the life I had escaped. Her voice wavered, but she pressed on, and then this old man appeared. He didn't look like a hero. He looked tired and worn and like he'd been driving all night. But he knelt down in front of that dumpster and he looked at me, really looked at me. And he asked if I was okay, not in a scary way, not in a demanding way, just gentle, kind, like he actually cared about the answer. Tears were flowing freely down her face now, but she did not stop to wipe them away. I told him I was fine. I lied, of course. I was anything but fine. But he didn't push. He just sat down on the ground, right there in the dirt, and he started talking to me. About his truck, about the stars, about his daughter who worked with kids like me. He talked for almost an hour, never asking me to come out, never reaching toward me, just being there, being safe. She looked out at the audience, meeting eyes with Rebecca, with Dr. Williams, with all the people who had come to honor this man. That was Grandpa Earl's gift. He made people feel safe. He made them feel seen. He made them believe that they mattered, that their lives had value, that they deserved kindness and protection. He didn't do it for recognition or thanks. He did it because that's who he was. That's who he'd always been. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. But in trying to do what was right, he changed countless lives. He saved 37 children from a burning bus. He saved me from a life of fear and pain. And he saved everyone he ever met from the easy trap of assuming they knew someone's story just by looking at them. She thought of Rebecca, sitting in the third row with tears streaming down her face, of Dr. Williams, who had never forgotten the man who carried him through the snow, of all the people, known and unknown, whose lives had been touched by Earl's simple philosophy. He taught me that kindness matters, Lily continued, that compassion is not weakness, but strength, that the most heroic thing any of us can do is see another person's pain and choose to help, even when it's difficult, even when it's inconvenient, even when the world tells us it's not our problem. She looked up at the sky, imagining Earl somewhere out there, still driving, still helping, still doing what was right. "Grandpa Earl," she said softly, "I promise to carry your legacy forward, to see people as you saw them, not as problems to be solved or cases to be processed, but as human beings with stories and hopes and fears, to lead with kindness, always, to try every single day to do what is right." She stepped back from the podium, her voice breaking but her resolve unshaken. "Thank you for stopping, Grandpa. Thank you for caring. Thank you for showing us all what it means to be truly human." The congregation rose as one, applauding a man who had never wanted applause, honoring a life that had been spent in service to others. And somewhere, perhaps, Earl Hutchins smiled and nodded, satisfied that his work was done. But the work was not done. It never would be, because Lily would carry it forward, and Rebecca and Dr. Williams and everyone who had ever been touched by Earl's example. They would see the scared children and the tired elderly and the dirty strangers, and they would choose not to walk away. They would stop. They would ask questions. They would help. That was Earl's true legacy. Not the headlines or the accolades, but the ripple effect of kindness spreading outward through generations, touching lives in ways that could never be fully measured. And in emergency rooms and truck stops and hospitals across the country, nurses and doctors and everyday people would remember the lesson that one elderly truck driver had taught them. Never judge too quickly. Never assume you know someone's story. Lead with compassion. Try to do what's right. That was the legacy of Earl Raymond Hutchins. That was the gift he left to the world. And it would never, ever be forgotten. In the years that followed, Lily kept her promise. She graduated from nursing school at the top of her class and took a position at St. Michael's Hospital, the same emergency room where her journey with Earl had begun. She specialized in pediatric care, working with children who had been abused or neglected, giving them the same compassion and protection that Earl had given her. Rebecca, now retired, came to visit her often. They would sit in the hospital cafeteria, sharing stories about patients and memories about Earl, keeping his spirit alive through their words and actions. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Lily said one afternoon, stirring her coffee absently. "I think about all the other kids out there, hiding behind dumpsters and in alleyways, waiting for someone to find them. I think about how lucky I was that it was Grandpa Earl who stopped that night. What if it had been someone else? What if it had been someone who didn't care, or who couldn't be bothered, or who was too afraid to get involved?" Rebecca reached across the table and squeezed Lily's hand. "That's why you're here," she said. "That's why you do what you do. So that when those kids come through these doors, there's someone like you waiting for them, someone who understands, someone who cares." Lily nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Someone who tries to do what's right. They sat in comfortable silence, two women bound by a shared history and a shared purpose. Outside the window, the sun was setting, painting the sky in the same shades of purple and gold that had decorated Lily's adoption celebration so many years ago. Somewhere out there, a truck driver was pulling into a rest stop. Somewhere a child was hiding in the shadows, waiting to be found. Somewhere a nurse was looking at a patient and choosing to see a person instead of a problem. The world was full of pain and cruelty and indifference. But it was also full of people like Earl Hutchins, people who chose compassion over convenience, who stopped when others walked by, who believed that every human being deserved dignity and care. That was his legacy. That was his gift to the world. And in emergency rooms and hospitals and truck stops across the country, that gift lived on. One act of kindness at a time, one person at a time. One moment at a time, forever. And in the quiet moments between shifts, when the hospital was still and the world outside was dark, Rebecca would sometimes stand at the window and think about Earl, about the lesson he had taught her without even trying, about the way a single encounter could change the course of a life. She had been so certain that night, so sure that she knew what she was seeing. An old man who did not belong, a dirty child who needed to be rescued from him, a situation that required her intervention, her judgment, her authority. How wrong she had been, how gloriously, beautifully, life-changingly wrong. Earl Hutchins had shown her that appearances meant nothing, that the most heroic people often looked the most ordinary. That kindness was not weakness, but the greatest strength of all, and every day, in ways large and small, she tried to honor that lesson. She tried to do what was right, just like Earl had taught her, just like Earl had always done, forever and always, until the end of time.